10 years of marriage, and for 6 of them, my wife had been entangled in a clandestine affair with her white Moonlight, her first love. For him, she denied me intimacy. For him, she terminated our first pregnancy. And now, she even had the audacity to try and keep me as a mere stand-in, a convenient placeholder to be manipulated and used. My heart, once full of love, had turned to ash. Finally, I'd resolved to end this charade, to file for divorce. But then, with crocodile tears streaming down her face, she'd wailed, "Ethan, after all the hardship I've endured for you, I'm finally pregnant." Her voice dripped with a false sweetness. "You, an orphan, haven't you always yearned for a family? How can you possibly abandon a child we've waited 10 years for?" Serafina stood me up again on our 10th wedding anniversary. Yesterday, she'd sworn she wouldn't miss the surprise I had planned. My gaze drifted back to the silver-gray Aston Martin outside the showroom window, a testament to my depleted savings, a gift I'd poured my heart and soul into for her. I tried calling Serafina again, my thumb hovering over her name on my contact list. Silence. No answer. No text reply. The store assistant, his patience wearing thin, approached me again, a forced smile plastered on his face. "Sir," he began, his tone carefully polite but edged with impatience, "we're about to close for the night. Is there anything else?" Could it be work again? Had she become so engrossed in her demanding career that she'd simply lost track of time? That's what she'd said on previous anniversaries, a familiar excuse echoing in my mind. Dejected, I dialed her number once more. This time, it connected. Clutching the bouquet of roses, their crimson petals now drooping slightly, I walked out of the showroom. My attention was drawn to a boisterous crowd gathered nearby, their laughter and cheers carrying on the evening air. Serafina's voice, apologetic yet distant, drifted from my phone's speaker. "Honey, I'm swamped at work, completely tied up. You're heading home already, right?" I remained silent, my feet leaden, rooted to the edge of the throng. My eyes struggled to reconcile the scene unfolding before me with the woman on the other end of the line. A group of stylish men and women, bathed in the warm glow of streetlights, were huddled together, their faces flushed with mirth. And in the center, a woman whose silhouette, whose very posture, mirrored my wife, Serafina. "Go to sleep. I'll be home as soon as I can." "Don't wait up," Serafina rushed on, her words tumbling out in a hurried whisper, as if she was eager to end the call. "Wait," I managed, my voice barely a croak. Are you really at the office?" The line went dead. She'd hung up, her impatience palpable even through the digital connection. Simultaneously, the woman in the crowd lowered her phone. She turned her face upwards, accepting a piece of candy from a man who leaned in close, feeding it to her with his lips. She laughed, a carefree, joyous sound that twisted like a knife in my gut, and turned her head, her gaze momentarily sweeping across the periphery of the crowd. And then I saw her clearly, unmistakably. The woman entwined with another man, radiating happiness, was indeed my wife, Serafina, the woman who had just dismissed me with a fabricated excuse about overtime. The bouquet slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the pavement with a soft thud. Serafina, lost in her bubble of bliss, remained oblivious to my presence. The voices of her friends and family, laced with playful mockery and cruel candor, drifted towards me. 11 years, Serafina, and you finally wrangled a confession out of Julian. 6 years of sleeping with Julian. It finally paid off. What about that stand-in husband of hers? Now that Julian's made a move, is she going to keep the substitute around? The teasing laughter echoed around her. Julian, the man beside her, playfully pinched Serafina's cheek. "Keeping him?" he echoed, a smirk playing on his lips. Serafina giggled, a sound that grated on my raw nerves. She stood on tiptoe, wrapping her arms around Julian's neck, and kissed him deeply, her laughter bubbling up again. "Ethan is just my caretaker," she declared, her voice laced with dismissive contempt. "Just a dog, really. He does everything I say, runs errands, fixes things. He's still got some use, but now that you're here, Julian, I can get rid of him whenever I want. 10 years of marriage. And this is how she truly saw me. Listening to Serafina's cruel words, a cold dread seeped into my bones. Julian's eyes, dark and possessive, swept over Serafina, pausing. At her neck. Sounds good, he murmured, his tone laced with possessiveness. But why are you still wearing that necklace he bought you? My gaze followed his, settling on the delicate chain encircling Serafina's throat. The necklace, a rare piece, a limited edition that Serafina had once coveted. I'd scrimped and saved, pulled every string I could to finally acquire it for her. The day I'd presented it to her, Serafina had declared me the best husband in the world, her eyes sparkling with genuine delight. But now, I watched in disbelief as Serafina's face contorted in distaste. As if handling something repulsive, she snatched the necklace from her neck, flinging it onto the ground with a flick of her wrist. She even ground her heel into the delicate chain, a gesture of utter disdain. Ugh, this old thing? I can't stand it, she scoffed, her voice dripping with disdain. Trash, just like Ethan. Neither of them are worthy of me. We're the perfect match, Julian. She nestled closer to him, her arms snaking around his waist. I only wore this necklace to humor Ethan, you know? It took him half a year to get his hands on it. Just played along for a while. If you don't like it, it's gone, she concluded with a dismissive wave of her hand. Serafina's friends erupted in exclamations of admiration, applauding her supposed devotion to Julian, their clapping punctuated by whistles and cheers. Julian, visibly pleased, swept her into his arms, hoisting her onto his hip, and kissed her with unrestrained passion, oblivious to the world around them. A surge of fury, hot and blinding, coursed through me. Watching my wife of 10 years, the woman I had pledged my life to, locked in an embrace with another man, ignited a rage I couldn't contain. Pushing through the laughing, jeering crowd, I lunged forward, intent on confronting her, demanding answers. Serafina, I roared, my voice raw with pain and fury. She broke away from Julian's kiss, her eyes glazed with passion, her gaze unfocused. She glanced in my direction, her eyes sliding over me. Without recognition, a dismissive, fleeting glance before she turned back to Julian, resuming their passionate embrace as if I were invisible. My heart twisted, a physical ache in my chest. Clenching my fists, I was about to push my way through the crowd again when my phone rang, jarring me back to a semblance of reality. Ethan, it's an emergency. You need to come home now. Serafina's mother's voice, sharp and demanding, crackled through the speaker. Emergency? What emergency? Her tone brooked no argument. A knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Swallowing my rage, I cast one last, searing look at Serafina before turning and sprinting back to my car. I sped away, tires screeching against the asphalt, adrenaline coursing through my veins. Fear gnawed at me as I burst through the front door of our apartment. But the scene that greeted me was far from an emergency. Serafina's parents were lounging on my sofa, utterly at ease. They'd brewed themselves tea, arranged fruit on a platter, and were casually examining my collection of vintage model airplanes, their fingers leaving greasy fingerprints on the delicate surfaces. Scattered around them on the floor, a trail of discarded wrappers and tissues marked their territory. What's happened? You said it was urgent? I asked, my voice strained, my heart still pounding in my chest. Serafina's mother's eyes flicked dismissively over my empty hands, a sneer twisting her lips. Our daughter's wedding anniversary, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. And I knew it. You're such a useless waste of space. You can't even convince my daughter to take a break from her precious career. Serafina's career? My mind flashed back to the image of her entwined with Julian, her laughter ringing in my ears. A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. Before I could speak, Serafina's father chimed in, his voice equally condescending. Not only are you less successful than our daughter, you're utterly clueless. Can't you see we've been sitting here for ages? No manners at all. He gestured towards the overflowing shopping bags in the kitchen. Instead of loitering around outside like a vagrant, why don't you make yourself useful and cook us something decent? Suddenly, it clicked. The emergency. Their urgent summons. It wasn't about me. It was about dinner. This is the emergency you were talking about? I asked, the disbelief echoing in my voice. Serafina's mother rolled her eyes impatiently. What else would it be? You can't keep our daughter happy. You can't even earn a decent living. The only thing you're good for is your cooking, which is slightly better than our housekeepers. And you should. Be grateful we even let you cook for us. Keeps you from becoming completely worthless. Now stop wasting time and get to it. Serafina's father barked, his voice laced with contempt. A bitter taste filled my mouth. Lost in the illusion of love for so long, I was only now, with stark clarity, seeing my true position in this family. A servant. A convenient tool. Nothing more. My fists clenched. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my head, meeting their condescending gazes. No, I said, the word a quiet but firm rebellion. Huh? What did you say? Serafina's mother's eyebrows shot up, her face contorting in disbelief. She started to rise from the sofa, her eyes narrowing dangerously. I stood my ground, unwavering. I said no, and I want a divorce from Serafina. The word divorce hung in the air, silencing the room. A stunned silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, Serafina's parents erupted in a chorus of outrage. You've lost your mind, her mother shrieked. Ignoring their tirade, I turned to walk towards the bedroom, seeking refuge from their venom. But then, Serafina's father, perhaps finally sensing the shift in my demeanor, the underlying resolve in my eyes, seemed to realize something was amiss. He grabbed his wife's arm, restraining her from launching herself at me. He shot me a look of pure contempt, a sneer twisting his lips. Forget it. The ungrateful wretch, he spat. We'll let Serafina deal with him. She'll put him back in his place, remind him who he really is. With that, he dragged his fuming wife towards the door, storming out of the apartment. The slam of the door echoed through the sudden silence. As they left, I heard him dialing Serafina's number, no doubt to fill her ears with their version of my insubordination. The apartment fell silent, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. I sank onto the sofa, burying my face in my hands. It was 1:23 a.m. when Serafina finally stumbled through the door, reeking of alcohol and perfume. Her cheeks flushed a rosy pink. Her evening of celebration had clearly been a success. She swayed towards me, her eyes unfocused, her voice slurring slightly. Ethan, she mumbled, work was just brutal tonight. You wouldn't believe the endless networking. So draining. My eyes scanned her, taking in every detail. She was still wearing the cashmere coat she'd worn to accept Julian's confession. The air around her was thick with the cloying scent of another man's cologne, a smell that turned my stomach. And yet, she stood before me, weaving a tapestry of lies with such effortless ease. Tears pricked at my eyes, a painful sting behind my lids. Serafina leaned against me, seeking support, but I recoiled instinctively, a visceral aversion rising within me. She frowned, fumbling in her designer handbag, finally producing a small, brightly colored box. It was a model Ferrari F40. Recognition flickered in my weary mind. She held it out to me, a pout playing on her lips. You always said you wanted this model, didn't you? I went to so much trouble to find one, and now I get it for you, and you're still sulking? The sight of the car model, a long-cherished desire materialized in my hand, collided with the searing images of Serafina and Julian's passionate embrace. A bitter cocktail of emotions swirled within me. Collecting model cars had been a passion of mine, a small indulgence that had brought me joy. But since marrying Serafina, every spare penny had been funneled into her desires, her whims. I'd mentioned the F40 casually months ago, a fleeting comment. I hadn't expected her to remember, let alone seek it out for me. The miniature Ferrari, nestled in my palm, felt heavy, tainted. My gaze drifted to Serafina, who was now clutching her head, groaning softly. I recognized the signs. The next wave of nausea was imminent. As always, instinct took over. I was at her side in an instant, guiding her to the bathroom, supporting her as she retched into the toilet. I washed her face, changed her clothes, and then, with practiced movements, I prepared a light broth, coaxing her to drink a few sips before gently carrying her to bed, tucking her in beneath the duvet. Turning away, my eyes fell again on the red car model, a stark reminder of the tangled web of lies and manipulations. My heart ached, with a raw, unbearable pain. I turned to leave, to get her a glass of water, when her hand shot out, grasping the hem of my shirt. "Don't go," she mumbled, her voice thick with sleep and alcohol. "Julian, just a little more. 6 years. You finally want me." Her words blurred, slurring into incoherence. "Forget Ethan. A cheap gift, and he's like a trained dog. Just stay with me." My feet froze, leaden, rooted to the spot. The last vestiges of self-deception crumbled. Even I could no longer deny the brutal truth. A crushing weight settled on my chest, suffocating me. Gently, but firmly, I unclasped Serafina's hand from my shirt. I walked out onto the balcony, the cold night air biting at my skin, and smoked cigarette after cigarette, the nicotine a poor substitute for solace. As dawn painted the sky in hues of gray and pale rose, I drafted the divorce papers, each word a painful acknowledgement of the decade lost, the love betrayed. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I turned to find Serafina, to finally confront her, to sever the ties that bound me to this toxic charade. But Serafina, stirring awake before me, greeted me with her usual imperious tone, demanding water. My chest tightened, a knot of suppressed anger constricting my breath. I remained rooted to the spot, refusing to move. Her face darkened, a flicker of annoyance crossing her features. Snatching a discarded slipper from the floor, she hurled it at me. "Are you really going to be this petty?" she snapped, her voice sharp. "So what if I was busy and missed your precious anniversary? I got you a gift, didn't I? Stop moping around and get over it." My gaze landed on the miniature Ferrari, a tangible symbol of her manipulative generosity, and a hollow laugh escaped my lips. A gift to keep me happy, like a dog. Finally, her eyes registered the papers clutched in my hand. She snatched them from me, her expression shifting from annoyance to bewildered alarm. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice laced with panic. My voice, when I finally spoke, was flat, devoid of emotion. "Last night, when you were with Julian, I was there. I saw everything. We're getting divorced, Serafina. But I'm pregnant," she interrupted, her voice rising, laced with a desperate, manufactured urgency. "We're having a baby, Ethan. Your baby." Her words hung in the air, a chilling echo of a conversation from 7 years prior. 7 years ago, Serafina had uttered those same words. "We're having a baby." I'd been ecstatic, a whirlwind of anticipation and joy. I'd spent weeks lost in daydreams of fatherhood, preparing for the arrival of our child. But then, a month later, the devastating news. A miscarriage, she'd said, a tragic accident. And in its wake, a chasm had opened between us. Intimacy dwindled. The topic of children became a forbidden subject, shrouded in unspoken grief. As an orphan, the yearning for a family, for the warmth of belonging, had always been a deep-seated ache within me. But my love for Serafina had always eclipsed my own desires. To spare her pain, I'd never pressed the issue. I'd buried my own longing, accepted her silence. Now, my eyes drifted to Serafina's abdomen, barely rounded, almost imperceptible. Could it be true? After 10 years of barren silence. Child? A child that would share my blood, a tangible link to her, to us. Hope, fragile and tentative, flickered in the ashes of my despair. My voice trembled, betraying the sudden surge of uncertainty that washed over me. "Really?" I whispered, the word barely audible. Serafina nodded, tears welling in her eyes, a performance honed to perfection. "Yes, really," she sobbed. "If you don't believe me, Go to Mrs. Hong's store outside the complex. She sells pregnancy tests. The one with the pink packaging. The confirmation, however fragile, extinguished the flames of my resolve, momentarily eclipsing the searing pain of betrayal. A child. Our child. The thought consumed me, pushing all else aside. The possibility of fatherhood, a dream rekindled, overwhelmed my senses. Panic seized me. I had to know. I had to be sure. Forgetting everything, even to close the door behind me, I bolted from the apartment, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I'd covered at least 10 meters before the realization hit me. My wallet. My phone. Nothing. I spun around, retracing my steps, my momentum carrying me back towards the open doorway. And then, I heard it. Serafina's voice. Sharp and triumphant, cutting through the morning air. She was on the phone, her tone conspiratorial, her laughter brittle and cruel. Yes, the pregnancy test from last time, the one you tricked your husband with. Just need to keep Ethan hooked for now. Julian hasn't agreed to a divorce yet, and I'm not letting go of a servant like Ethan just yet. He's too useful. And the baby, she snorted, a sound devoid of warmth or tenderness. The last one was an accident. Had to get rid of it for Julian. Definitely not having another one with Ethan. Private cinema with Julian tomorrow? Even stocks don't only fall without rising. How could my love, my trust, be endlessly exploited without demanding some return? The last ember of hope flickered and died, leaving behind only ashes. This was it. The final, crushing blow. I'd been played, manipulated, and utterly, irrevocably, betrayed. My heart, once shattered, now lay in ruins. With a force that surprised even myself, I slammed the door open, interrupting Serafina's triumphant phone call. "Stop lying to me, Serafina," I said, my voice cold, devoid of all emotion. "We are getting divorced. Now." A flicker of panic flashed across Serafina's face, a brief tremor in her carefully constructed facade. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. She hung up the phone with a nonchalant flick of her wrist, smoothly transitioning back into her practiced role of injured innocence. "You're back already," she said, her voice laced with feigned surprise. "Honestly, Ethan, you're being ridiculous. Eavesdropping on private conversations? So disrespectful." Her tone dripped with false indignation, the practiced whine of a spoiled child caught in a lie. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking gall. It was almost laughable. And yet, Serafina delivered her lines with such unwavering conviction, such practiced ease, that for a fleeting moment, chilling doubt flickered within me. Could she still manipulate me? Could she still twist the narrative, even now, even after everything? The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking gall. It was almost laughable. And yet, Serafina delivered her lines with such unwavering conviction, such practiced ease, that for a fleeting moment, chilling doubt flickered within me. Could she still manipulate me? Could she still twist the narrative, even now, even after everything? But the charade had worn thin, the illusion shattered. The more she spoke, the clearer it became. I wasn't just a substitute, a stand-in for Julian. I was less than nothing, a convenience, a disposable tool. And the realization, sharp and brutal, finally pierced through the fog of denial. Just how low had I sunk in her estimation? A wave of nausea, a gut-wrenching ache of betrayal, washed over me. My chest heaved, each breath a painful reminder of the suffocating weight of her lies. Any lingering flicker of hope, any foolish yearning to salvage what was left of our marriage, vanished, extinguished, by the cold, hard truth. My voice, when I finally spoke, was devoid of emotion, flat and final. "Fine," I said, the word clipped. "Whatever. But let's be clear, Serafina. I know that for 6 years of our 10-year marriage, you've been tangled up with Julian." My gaze bored into hers, unwavering. "From the moment you first came into my life, you saw me as nothing more than a substitute for him." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations, with years of accumulated pain. And even now, you're using this supposed pregnancy to manipulate me, to guilt-trip me, to keep playing your games. My voice hardened, losing any trace of tenderness. Serafina, I stated, each syllable distinct, each word a nail in the coffin of our relationship. We're done. This is the end. The unexpected unveiling of the truth, the sudden ripping away of her carefully constructed facade, left Serafina momentarily speechless. Her lips pressed into a thin, pale line, her eyes widening in a flicker of genuine shock. For a long, agonizing moment, she simply stared at me, her carefully crafted composure crumbling around her. But the silence didn't last. The practiced mask of victimhood, the arsenal of emotional manipulation, was quickly deployed. Tears welled in her eyes, a practiced performance of wounded innocence. Her voice, trembling with manufactured indignation, rose in a crescendo of self-pity. "You heartless bastard," she wailed, her voice cracking dramatically. "What utter nonsense are you spouting? You're so good at making things up. Maybe you should become a novelist." Her tears flowed freely now, a torrent of crocodile tears. "Well, I'm telling you," she sobbed, her voice laced with self-righteous anger, "you're wronging me. And until you go away and think long and hard about what you've just said, don't expect me to forgive you, and don't even think about coming back." I watched her performance unfold, a cold detachment settling over me. Serafina, the master manipulator, resorting to her well-worn tactics. In the past, those tears, that carefully crafted vulnerability, would have been my undoing. Each tear would have pierced my heart. Each sob would have fueled a desperate need to comfort her, to take the blame, to beg for forgiveness. I would have rushed to her side, desperate to mend the rift, to soothe her wounded pride. I had always believed that her tears, her moments of perceived fragility, were a testament to her love for me, a sign that she trusted me enough to reveal her vulnerability. A successful, strong woman, choosing to show me her weakness. It had seemed like the ultimate validation of my love. But now, standing here, watching her theatrical display, the truth was stark and undeniable. It wasn't love. It wasn't vulnerability. It was calculated manipulation. It was the cold, cynical confidence of someone who knew, with absolute certainty, that she could play me for a fool. Without another word, without another glance at her tear-streaked face, I turned and walked away. Her eyes, wide with expectation, followed me, waiting for the familiar capitulation, the predictable apology, the desperate plea to stay. But this time, there was only silence. I walked out of the apartment, out of her life, without a backward glance, leaving her standing there, alone with her carefully constructed lies. "Ethan, get out here and have a drink with me." The pain, raw and unrelenting, gnawed at me. Despite my resolve, despite the burning anger, a deep ache persisted. I couldn't bear to be alone with it. I reached for my phone, dialing the number of my only true friend, William. William, ever loyal, didn't hesitate. Minutes later, he roared up on his sleek motorcycle, ready to rescue me from my self-inflicted misery. He whisked me away to a bustling outdoor food stall, the kind Serafina would have scorned as beneath us. We ordered mountains of greasy, delicious barbecue skewers, the kind Serafina considered low class, and 2 towering mugs of ice-cold beer. And then, the floodgates opened. I poured out my heart, the words tumbling out in a torrent of pain and confusion. "I only ever loved her," I choked out, my voice thick with unshed tears. "Why would she do this to me? I worked so damn hard to get to her, to be worthy of her. Was the $10,000 I gave her family as a bride price not enough? Was it easy money to come by?" My voice cracked. "The car, the apartment, everything's in her name. Wasn't that enough to prove my love? I'm an orphan, William. I made her my whole family. How could she be so cruel?" The more I spoke, the deeper I sank into the abyss of despair. Severing this connection, this decade-long entanglement, felt like tearing flesh from bone, a brutal, agonizing amputation of a part of myself. I was drowning in a sea of grief, the waves of sorrow threatening to overwhelm me. William listened patiently, offering silent comfort. He confessed he was battling his own romantic woes, a shared misery forging a strange bond between us. We drank, we talked, we mourned our respective heartbreaks. And then, as the night wore on, William, in the midst of his own drunken lament, suddenly recoiled, his eyes widening in alarm. "Ethan," he exclaimed, his voice laced with concern, "you're burning up." He reached out, his hand brushing against my forehead. "You're like a furnace." He stepped back, taking in my thin jacket, the chill night air, and his face contorted in worry. "You said you went out early this morning, before dawn, to check if Serafina was lying about the pregnancy, right?" I nodded, my head swimming, a strange lethargy creeping through my limbs. "And when you left," William continued, his voice rising in urgency, "she didn't even tell you to take a coat?" I nodded again, a wave of dizziness washing over me. My body felt heavy, disconnected. William, his brow furrowed with concern, had clearly grasped the severity of the situation. He glanced at his phone, a frustrated sigh escaping his lips. A message from his boss, summoning him back to work. For an urgent matter. He looked around the deserted street, his eyes scanning for help, for any familiar face. Finding none, he made a snap decision. With a grim set to his jaw, he dialed Serafina's number. "Serafina," he barked into the phone, his voice sharp and accusatory. "If you have even a shred of decency left, you need to come get him. Now." William's voice, amplified by the phone's speaker, cut through the haze of my feverish thoughts. A bitter laugh bubbled up in my throat. "Forget it," I mumbled, waving a dismissive hand. "I'm just a substitute, remember? In 10 years of marriage, Serafina's never once picked me up, not even once. She's never taken care of me when I'm sick, always too busy with work." My voice trailed off, the words slurring, my eyelids growing heavy. Why would she? Before the sentence could be completed, a flash of crimson, a screech of tires, pierced the night. Serafina's Ferrari, a blatant symbol of her wealth and status, screeched to a halt at the curb. William, relief flooding his face, practically shoved me towards Serafina's car. "She came," he exclaimed, clapping me on the shoulder. "See? 10 years, Ethan. Even a stone would have warmed up by now. Talk to her. Really talk to her. Maybe it's all just a misunderstanding." His words, meant to be comforting, felt flimsy, insubstantial, swept away by the cold night wind. But as he helped me into the passenger seat of Serafina's car, his hopeful words, however fragile, lodged themselves somewhere in the recesses of my fevered mind. A wave of chills, followed by a sudden rush of heat, coursed through me. Serafina, her face a mask of cold fury, slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. Silence. Stony, oppressive silence. Then, with a jolt that sent a jolt of pain through my aching head, the engine roared to life. The car lurched forward, tires spitting gravel, and we were hurtling down the street. Serafina's voice, sharp and accusatory, shattered the silence. "You are such a drama queen, Ethan. Always making a mountain out of a molehill. What? You had to get your buddy to guilt-trip me into coming to rescue you. Did you expect me to drop everything and come running the moment you called?" Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Grow up, Ethan. Can't you handle anything like a man? Yes, Julian and I have a connection, but it's just a close friendship. You wouldn't understand. Stop making a fuss and complaining about it. And embarrassing yourself by getting drunk in public, moping around. How pathetic can you be?" I turned my head away, staring out the window, the barrage of her accusations washing over me. My body ached, my head throbbed, but the physical discomfort was almost overshadowed by the relentless verbal assault. The city lights blurred past, streaks of color dissolving into the night. The rush of wind, the passing cars, the familiar urban landscape. It all triggered a sudden, jarring flashback, a vivid memory surfacing from the depths of my past. A long time ago, a lifetime ago, in a faded, sepia-toned past, soundtracked by the crackle of old cassette tapes. Serafina, braving a torrential downpour, running to my side with an umbrella, shielding me from the rain, holding out a steaming, foil-wrapped sweet potato, unearthed from the depths of her oversized, fleece-lined pocket, offering it to me like a precious treasure. And me, sitting quietly beside her as she worked late into the night, peeling grapes, one by one, feeding them to her with gentle hands. Serafina, secretly, surreptitiously, buying piles of clothes for me, a mountain of unexpected gifts appearing on my doorstep, a silent, unspoken gesture of, what? Affection? Care? Those were memories from a distant, almost forgotten past, faded snapshots from a time that felt both real and dreamlike, like a fallen leaf, miraculously resurrected in the warmth of spring. Back then, I had believed, with unwavering certainty, that I was loved. But what did love truly feel like? Was it the sudden thaw on a glacial mountain? The unexpected warmth of melting snow? Was it the sudden gush of water in a parched desert, a life-giving spring erupting from barren sand? Slowly, cautiously, I shifted my gaze, turning my head to study Serafina's profile. She was still berating me, her voice laced with contempt, but she had come. She had driven out into the night to pick up her sick, drunken, pathetic husband. Could it be? A fragile, almost desperate hope flickered within me. Could she actually love me, in her own twisted way? Could it be, as William suggested, that we were trapped in some elaborate misunderstanding? The alcohol, the fever, the relentless emotional turmoil, it all conspired to cloud my judgment, to suspend my disbelief. My breath hitched, caught in my throat. Then, Serafina's phone buzzed. Her face softened, a smile blooming on her lips. Her voice, when she answered, transformed, becoming saccharine sweet, dripping with false affection. Coming, darling, coming. Julian, just wait for me. No, not a second longer, I promise. A giggle, light and artificial. Of course, it's just me. Just the two of us, like we planned. The sugary sweet words, the intimate tone, were directed at Julian, not me. The realization hit me like a physical blow, shattering the fragile hope that had begun to take root. Her voice, so tender for him, so cold and dismissive for me. Hanging up, Serafina turned to me, her face instantly reverting to its earlier mask of cold indifference. All right, that's far enough, she announced, her voice curt. Consider this a ride. I have plans. Get out. And with those words, without a flicker of hesitation, without a shred of remorse, she dumped me on the side of the highway. Without a word, without a second glance, she sped away, leaving me stranded, alone, on the desolate shoulder of the highway. The wind, whipping across the open expanse of the highway, seemed to howl with a renewed ferocity, a bitter, mocking sound. The sudden exposure to the cold air, after the stifling heat of the car, sent a jolt through my fevered body. The extreme temperature shift, the shock of her callous dismissal, triggered a strange, disorienting sensation. A bizarre mix of burning heat and icy cold. My legs buckled beneath me. I collapsed onto the hard asphalt, my body trembling uncontrollably. The image of Serafina's saccharine sweetness, with Julian, juxtaposed with her brutal indifference towards me, flashed through my mind, each contrast a fresh wound, a deeper cut. Even for a man, tears, hot and bitter, welled in my eyes, finally overflowing, spilling down my cheeks, unnoticed, unheeded in the vast emptiness of the highway shoulder. The dam of control, the fragile wall of stoicism, finally crumbled.